right, it is time to begin our presentation. I am pleased to introduce Vicki Klingon, the director of the SDMC at the Justice Center. Take it away, Vicki.
Morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We're really excited to be here and talk a bit about SDMC with you. We have a fantastic program today. I'm going to kick things off just with an incredibly brief overview of SDMC for you, just in case anybody's not familiar. And just really quick, if you would use your emojis to let me know, have you ever submitted an application to SDMC or participated in an SDMC hearing? Give me a thumbs up. And if you haven't, do like the little surprise face so we can kind of get a feel for people. Looks like a lot of people. Okay, a good mix of people who've done this before and who haven't. So if you have not done this before, you're probably going to have to catch a few things in this overview and have a better idea of what it is that SDMC is and does. Our panel is going to give some tips and tricks and sort of talk through like the nitty-gritty on the ground perspective of it, which will be useful either way. I think it's going to be really fantastic. So we can go right ahead. All right. So Surrogate Decision-Making Committee, we are, as was noted before, an alternative to the court system for decision-making for non-emergency major medical and end-of-life care. Major medical is something beyond like, a doctor's visit. It's something that involves an incision or a significant risk. And end-of-life care is withholding or withdrawal of life-sustaining treatment. So a do not resuscitate order counts as end-of-life care, things like that. We are available for people who qualify and who lack the capacity to make their own medical decisions and have no legally authorized decision maker. So SDMC is just here for the people who can't make their own decisions, don't have anyone legally authorized who can do it for them. And if they are being served by or have ever received services through the Office for People with Developmental Disabilities, or have lived in a residence funded, licensed, or operated by the Office of Mental Health or the Office of Addiction Services and Supports, they are eligible for SDMC decision-making for major medical care. For end-of-life care, it's a little bit different for the qualifications. So we, once again, the person cannot make their own decisions and they have no legally authorized surrogate and they have a diagnosis of intellectual or developmental disability. So that can get a little tricky if you're in the field working on this, but we can assist people for major medical if they're served, depending on what service agency they are receiving services through. And for end-of-life care, it's entirely diagnosis based. End-of-life care also requires that there is an illness or injury from which there's no recovery and will reasonably cause death within 1 year, permanent unconsciousness, or an ongoing medical condition with a requirement of life-sustaining care that causes an extraordinary burden. So if you need to apply for SDMC, if you're working with somebody who wants to, who needs services through SDMC, the best place to start is the SDMC website. That is going to be added to the chat any moment now so that you'll have the link directly. It's part of the Justice Center website. If you're on the Justice Center website and you go up to the advocacy and support link at the top, you'll get to the SDMC. You can scroll down and find the information. Otherwise, it is justicecenter.ny.gov/SDMC. And it's available here 24 hours a day, resources available at your fingertips. What you're looking for if you're applying for SDMC is a declaration. So we call it a declaration because you're declaring this is a person who needs assistance and here's what we need. The person who submits it is called the declarant. These are legal terms because even though we're not the court system, we do use a lot of the same terminology and same process. The declarant is really, it can be anyone involved in that person's care. So it could be the director of the facility, it could be the nurse who provides services at the residence, a care manager, social worker, any of those people can do that. You're really the person responsible for pulling it all together. So you're coordinating information from a few different sources. There are 4 SDMC forms that you will need to download here. And depending on whether it's major medical or end of life, you'll click on the appropriate section below that says apply for, and then you'll get right to the forms. There's a declaration form that's really contact information, basic info. A capacity evaluation needs to be completed. So you need a professional who can say this person does not have the capacity to make this decision. And then there's a certification on medical need or end of life care need that is completed by physicians who can say, this is what's needed today. And then we also need related medical information. So we need a med list, any consults, any kind of backup documentation that goes into the details of why this is needed would also be submitted. And once you bring all of those things together, you're going to submit it to SDMC. You can fax it to us. You can send it by encrypted email. We prefer you do not mail it to us because that causes a delay. It takes a little while. But we're happy to work with you. If if one of those is an issue, give us a call and we'll work out how to do it. Our panel is going to give you some incredibly interesting feedback on how they complete this step and give you some tips on it later. Sorry, I went a little too fast. So the second step after you've submitted that to SDMC is that we will receive it and one of our nurses will review the paperwork and talk it through with the declarant and the nurse and possibly other contacts. They're ensuring that the requirements of the law are met and that everything is in place, that an SDMC proceeding is appropriate and the person qualifies. They are also going to ask some questions, just clarify any information that seems like it might cause confusion, or just seems like it might need a little bit more information for the packet. Because the next step is that this goes to a hearing. Our hearings are not held in a courtroom. They're actually held by video conference. Much like we are talking today, except everyone's on video and we interact with each other. We have a panel of 4 volunteers who actually hear the case. They ask questions and solicit testimony from the participants of the hearing, and they're the ones who then will deliberate and make a decision. The person who needs consent must attend the SDMC proceeding, so they must be on video with support from caregivers if they need it. And we need really anybody who can provide insight into that person's life, their quality of life, what they like to do, what decisions they make, if there's anyone involved in their life, as well as that medical need that's being requested. So if it's end of life and you know that there's a staff member who's known that person for more than 15 years, bring them to the hearing, have them there to share any thoughts or anything that person might have shared with them about their wants and needs. At the hearing, they're going to be going through those 3 questions of capacity, legally authorized surrogate, and best interest. And the panel is going to ask questions regarding this in order. They deliberate on each of these. If needed, they can find that the person has capacity and can make their own decision, or that there is a legally authorized surrogate and the SDMC cannot make this decision. If they find that there's not capacity, and they're going to do that by talking directly to the person in need, as well as to the other people offering testimony, then they will move on to whether there's a legally authorized surrogate, once again, asking questions of everyone involved. And that's legally authorized is a good thing to note here. That's outlined in New York state law. So it's not anyone who's involved in the person's care, or it can't be a friend. It would just be the people who are outlined in New York state law as a legally authorized surrogate. Everyone else can give feedback, they can attend the hearing, they can offer support, but they're not recognized as the decision maker under the law. So if there's not a legally authorized surrogate, the panel then will move on to best interests. And that is really when the providers and the people who are medical experts will need to testify as to what this thing is that's needed, why it's important for this person, what might happen if they didn't get it, are there any alternatives, all of that. And then the panel deliberates. They do that in private, they won't do that in front of you, but then they'll pull everyone back onto the webinar to talk through once again what their decision has been. So they'll offer a decision, and usually at the hearing or shortly thereafter you would receive an outcome form. If it's consent, you'll get a consent from SDMC that you can use for that procedure. If it's denied, you get out information about that as well. The panel can also say we need more information on this and specify something that they might need, and then you would come back and do another SDMC proceeding to get that done. that is a very, very brief and abridged overview of what SDMC is and what we do. If you need more information on this, I really would refer you to our website. There's really great resources. You're going to hear really great stuff in just a minute, but if you need afterwards to review things, you can go to our website. We have training videos. We have information on how to fill out the forms. We have a mock hearing so you can get comfortable with what that might look like. We even have sample forms that you can use if you're not sure how to enter information on the forms. We are also available every day between 8 and 4. Someone is here on the unit, can answer your phone call and give you any assistance that you might need, or send us an email and we're happy to help. You can use that QR code to get to our website. And without further ado, I'm going to hand things over now to Stephanie Arana, who's our moderator for today's presentation, and our panel will share some a little bit more detailed information on what I just went over. So here you go.
Thank you, Vicki, and good morning, everybody. I'll ask my panelists now to turn on their videos so that they can connect with me. As Vicki mentioned, my name is Stephanie Arana, and I am the volunteer and contractor manager of the SDMC program. I have the pleasure today of facilitating today's discussion, where our panel members are going to help us understand best practices for utilizing SDMC services. To get us started with this discussion, I would like to ask each of our panelists just to give us a brief introduction here so our audience can get a sense of who they're hearing from. In doing this, I ask each panel member just to explain the agency you work for, your title in the program, and your primary role. So is there someone who would like to get us started with that? If you unmute, I can see you want to start. Okay, so Anoop, thank you.
I'm Anoop Kaur with Mental Hygiene Legal Service. I'm the Deputy Chief Attorney for the Bronx offices. So all the SDMC cases come across my desk or my email, and I assign them to the attorneys in my office. I've been with MHLS for 24 years, going on 25 years. I've done a lot of SDMC hearings. And for those of you who don't know, Mental Hygiene Legal Service, as an agency, we represent all individuals who are living in OPWDD residences throughout the state. I mean, I only cover the Bronx. And we are their attorney, and we represent them at a variety of different proceedings, including ICCs. We attend their life plan meetings. So we have a lot of involvement with our OPWDD clients.
Thank you, Anoop, and thanks for providing a little bit of an explanation of what you do as MHLS. Stacy, would you mind going next?
Sure. My name is Stacy Peck. I'm an administrative assistant here at Lexington ARC. I'm also an LPN. We have homes in Fulton, Albany, and Schoharie County. I act as the declarant for all SDMC requests that come through my desk. We have about 150 at any given time of people that don't have any legal authorized decision-making person for them. So yeah.
Thank you, Stacy. And we're definitely going to talk more about what is the responsibility of a declarant as we move throughout this discussion today. So, Vicki, would you go next, please?
Yes. Hi, my name's Vicki Stankowska. I'm a complex case social worker at Upstate Medical Center, which is located in Syracuse, New York. Part of my role I've been here for 15 years, and we, variously throughout the years, we actually have been doing a lot of SDMCs, and I've become sort of an expert in understanding it due to just the various patients that come in here that don't have an authorized decision maker to make the decisions for them. So a part of we actually, as a hospital, we serve 17 counties. So at any point we can have any individuals coming in from various walks of life. So we are very involved with the Justice Center for Developmental Disability and SDMC due to that reason.
Thank you, Vicki. And then Sophia, please.
Good morning. My name is Sophia Lajurai. I am the Director of Social Services at Innovative Resources for Independence. We're a downstate agency located in Queens. We service Queens, Brooklyn, Long Island, and the Bronx. We have about 260 people that live in our certified setting. And we have about 10 to 15 people that require SDMC because they have no advocates.
Thank you, everybody, for providing introductions. I think it's helpful just to give everybody a sense of the different systems and settings that you work in, which also helps to show the different organizations SDMC partners with when providing services to individuals with special needs. So I think that was helpful to learn. We have people from residential programs, hospitals, and then we even have a new peer who helps to support the legal side with the attorney uh, representation for individuals with special needs. So now I want to talk a little bit to start our discussion about the specific positions that you play in the SDMC process. And when I talk about this, I really want you to think about, from the start of an application when a declaration needs to be submitted to SDMC and you know that somebody needs medical consent, what does that process look like for you? All the way to, working with the SDMC nurse to submit the case and process it, answer any questions or gather additional information, providing testimony, and then also, Noop, on your side, really representing the person legally, kind of what's your role there, and what are some of the steps that you take. So anybody who wants to get us started with that, again, if you unmute, I think that's a good way for me to know that you would like to start with the discussion. Sophia?
Yeah. So Social Services Department oversees all SDMC cases. We ensure that the process starts from 0 all the way through the hearing, and after the hearing to ensure the tracking and following up with the physicians if needed. So what we do is anytime that there is a recommended procedure that requires SDMC, we work closely with our residential and clinical teams to ensure that we get the documentation for the SDMC, the 3 sets of forms and supporting documentation in a timely manner. So we then review all the documentation and complete the 200 form, and then we submit it to SDMC. And we will speak with the nurse and review the case. And if there's any questions, we try to, even if it's a technical question or a clinical question, we streamline the communication even with the SDMC staff through our department to avoid any delays or phone tag. And we try to connect our team directly with the SDMC nurse, especially if it's a nursing question that I may not be able to answer. We then also attend the hearing as the declarant and ensure that the appropriate staff that know the individual best and know the history of the individual's medical history is also on the hearing. And then, like I said, at the end, we ensure that the procedure actually took place. There was no delays, no cancellations. And we also track how it went because that's one of the questions that we may be asked later on. And then, yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Sophia. That was very comprehensive. And we're really going to touch on all of that as we continue our discussion in terms of, how do you determine who's going to be present at the hearing, to testify? And, even, after the decision is issued, that you have responsibilities too to make sure that the appointments are made and the care is followed up on. Stacy, would you like to go next for us, it looks like?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So to start, we encourage the nurses when they first find out that an individual needs a major medical procedure done or end of life decision done, that they reach out to me immediately before even starting the packet. This ensures that I can work on getting the capacity completed and that I can do a little research on the background of the individual, make sure that they don't have family or an advocate or an authorized representative for them. I help them gather all the paperwork that they need to fill out, answer any questions. Been doing this for about 8 years, so I know exactly what needs to be done, where the nurse may only do one once a year or once every few years. So it's just great to have that one person that's able to facilitate that and help them with that. We then work with SDMC to answer any questions about the packet once it's sent. We help get everybody into one room for the hearing, because a lot of times if they're at their homes trying to get on the computer, or and there's 3 different groups and 3 different computers trying to get on, there's always some kind of technical difficulty. So we try to all meet in one place for the hearing. And then, of course, after the consent is provided, I track it right up until the procedure is done and made sure that that outcome form is sent to MHLS. I continue that tracking right up until then, just to make sure everything went okay. And yeah, that's about it. Streamlined anyway.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Stacy.
Mhm.
Anoop, would you like to go next for us?
Sure.
Thank you.
So, when we get a packet, and as I indicated, the way that it works in the Bronx, which is not necessarily how it works everywhere else, we have attorneys assigned to particular agencies. So oftentimes we're familiar with the person. There are other times we aren't. If we're not very familiar with the person, what we'll want to do right away is obviously review the paperwork, try to see if we have a life plan for them to kind of review that, make sure. You'd be surprised where we found sometimes, wait, there's a family member here. I don't know why we're doing SDMC, and we might want to, we may then find out the person's passed away, but according to the last life plan, there was a family member. We make sure that the paperwork is filled out properly, that the right person with the right credentials reviewed everything. We will meet with the client, of course, and we will also I tend to always speak to either the declarant or the nurse. Usually sometimes it's the same person, and do a lot of Googling to find out about the procedure, although it's very helpful when sometimes in the SDMC packet, there is a lot of information about the procedure itself. Somebody else has Googled. We do a lot of research because it may be something I'm not familiar with. And also the SDMC nurse has been very helpful when I've had questions. I found that to be also a good resource to use. So in a nutshell, that's what we do when we get the paperwork. And we also may ask, oftentimes I do ask for the SDMC history, which MHLS is entitled to get.
Thank you, Anoop. And then Vicki?
Yes, so in a hospital, it's a little bit different because typically the patients come in for a medical reason, and sometimes it's end of life. So it depends on what the purpose of patient coming in. As social workers, we're consult service here. So anytime there's an individual that is either connected or they seem that they're eligible for OPWDD, we're typically consulted to really look at the role of who the surrogate decision maker is. Is there a healthcare proxy? And so on and so forth. And when we typically determine that there is no authorized decision maker, then we ensure that the team and the doctors that are working with this patient are aware that there will be a committee that needs to be held in order for them to make a decision. Our role is, my role typically is to really have a discussion with the team to let them know is that, unless it's an emergent medical procedure, we have to go through the process of a surrogate decision-making committee, and we fill out the paperwork if the intention is for a medical procedure. And sometimes our patients do come in and we don't know if they're going to need a procedure, if it's something that just kind of happens. So it's really important that we're on top of our game to make sure that we're aware that this person is somehow connected to the services and receiving them. And then when it comes down to life, we really focus on discussing with the teams to make sure that this person will ultimately meet criteria for the end of life, because a lot of times, we have to make sure that we follow all of those procedures and steps that we go through. So when it comes down to either one, I typically separate all my forms in fours and I kind of put it out there for each individual to know what they need. The good thing is with us, we really work closely hand in hand with the nursing from the group homes, both either voluntary and voluntary IRIS. And so we're able to really kind of ensure that there was no family. We double check on that. And then we discuss whether or not a patient has a certified psychiatrist or psychologist that is involved to figure out the capacity piece. More than likely, we don't have that a lot of times due to different various reasons. And one of the good things in our hospital, we have 3 individuals that have been certified, one through the application process, through OPWDD to become a certified a physician that is able to determine the capacity for these individuals. So we have that on hand, and we have to fill it out and make sure that all those, all the little forms are sent and all the medical information is sent in, we send it in and wait for our committee to be scheduled. And every single attending or resident, we do tell them that they have to participate to make sure that they are going to make it's an hour long typically, so they know what to expect because it is busy. A lot of times, you know, we have to ensure that they're not being scheduled when something is going on with a procedure. So we're coordinating with SDMC, and it's really we just sit. We're all in different places sometimes. I tend to sit with the patient if they're in the hospital to make sure that they're participating. If there's any questions, MHLS comes to our hospital to see the patient in person, make sure things are okay. And then my role is going to be to, once the meeting is done, the consent is being given and or letters of non-objection if it's end of life. And then we put the packet together and ensure everybody has it that is been participating in this particular meeting.
Thank you. It just shows that there are so many moving parts to even just getting the application put together so that you can submit it to SDMC to ask for consent. And I think you mentioned a good point when talking about the end of life care requirements for the capacity certification. We know that sometimes it can be complicated to find that requirement of a certified physician who has experience working with individuals with special needs. And most of the time, you know, we tell people contact SDMC if you have questions. Our contacts internally have some good resources that we can direct you to. And then the DDSO is always a good place too if you do not have somebody who meets those qualifications, just to find somebody so that you can move forward with the certification. Um, while you guys were talking about, you know, kind of the processes that you have internally, I'd like to talk about some of the timelines that it might take you at times to really get all of the moving parts in terms of the medical certification, the capacity certification. Can you give us a little bit of insight on that? Maybe an example of a request that you had recently and, you know, really the process that you needed to go through and what's the typical turnaround time and if that might differ depending, you know, on who you're working with. And I'll really throw that out to anybody. And Anoop, if you even have anything to mention in terms of, you know, just making sure that that moves forward, please feel free to jump in. Stacy?
Yes. Sometimes our biggest difficulty I have found is getting the form back from the provider or the doctor that's performing the procedure. I think a lot of times it's difficult for them because they don't understand the need or the process. So a lot of phone calls, you know, dropping the line that we don't want to delay care usually helps because it's definitely not something that we want to do for the people that we support. So that is one of the biggest things that we find that we have a hard time with. Um, you know, I think a lot of times the nurses will make a phone call and just, you know, try to explain the process to, you know, the office and let them know, that, we can't go forward with the procedure until we get this paperwork. Um, we do try to streamline everything very quickly. Like I said before, we work on getting that capacity done while we're waiting for all the other paperwork. So that way, when we get everything together, that's already completed. And that seems to help a little bit. But I think just communicating with the provider's office and explaining the process seems to help.
Yeah, probably helping them understand that this is just the first part, right? Like we need to get the declaration and then there's a whole series of steps after. You know, SDMC has to process the case, we have to schedule a hearing, we have to get a decision. And sometimes some of the physicians you're working with, if they're not familiar with SDMC, might not know the time that goes into it. So thank you for some of those tips, even just making sure that you're following up and maybe using the line of like, we really want to make sure we're providing timely care here. So please try to do your part, you know. Sophia?
Yeah, I just want to piggyback off what Stacy said. We always find that the most difficult form to get completed is the form that the doctor completes. What we try to do is because we have the same individuals that are going through SDMC, we try to have the medical specialist who brings them to all their appointments have one of the forms ready to go in the binder. So in case if during that appointment they're recommending a procedure that may need this invasive SDMC hearing, they already have it ready to go. We find that a lot of times the doctor, and then if we don't need it, we don't use it. If it ends up not being needed later on, but we'd rather have it done in front of the doctor while they're there. It doesn't always work. Sometimes, like you said, they have questions that, they don't know what they're signing, they don't know what they're filling out, they don't understand why their consent is not sufficient enough. But it has definitely helped with the timeline and delay in terms of the doctor. And then also what we do is same thing, we follow up with the providers and ensure that, delay of care, all those terms that we may need to throw in there. Because we find sometimes the physicians will say, oh, we need to have them come back in to see them again to complete the form. So that doesn't happen often, but it does sometimes happen, and we try to avoid that as much as possible.
Thank you. And great point in terms of having the forms available if you know that people you're supporting are not able to typically make their own medical decisions. And if you go to appointment, maybe they'll need something and, need consent through SDMC. Having those forms available can make it, quicker in terms of moving forward with the process if you can give it to the doctor. Vicky?
Yeah, for us, I always have the medical doctor here, so having them fill it out is the easiest part.
Okay.
We tend to really talk to them and explain to them this is a process. So I want to make sure that they talk about everything that they need, because in any kind of treatment, or I mean, procedure, sometimes they anticipate something else happening, and so I want to make sure that when we're talking to them is that, if you're anticipating something happening, this is when we do talk about this, and you put it down. If that way, we already have a consent, and we can talk about it during the meeting with the committee. Most of the time, my most difficult thing is getting a capacity form filled out. And just because we have 3 physicians doesn't necessarily mean that most of our physicians are available when we need them. So sometimes that's the piece that really does take a lot of time to kind of get. And so saying that, we do work with the DDSO a lot, and they are able to kind of help us find an alternative in the event that we need it. But really sitting down and explaining to our physicians that this isn't going to be a turnaround of you fill it out and then the next day you get to do the procedure. We really have to, it takes time. And so once we have them understand, it goes pretty smoothly for the most part. If it's not on a Friday afternoon at 3, which is usually how it goes.
Yeah. And I would think just communication with the provider agencies too, if you have somebody say for end of life care, is really important that they're, open to collaborating with you and providing the information that you need, because if you're not as familiar with this person, right? They're in a hospital setting. So you really need the knowledge of people who are more familiar with this person to help fill in some of the gaps historically.
Definitely. And one of the things that I, been doing this for 15 years, the patients that come through here from the group homes, the group home staff are fantastic. They are family. And we ensure that every step of the way that they are informed, obviously included, but really even when it comes down to the end of life, we want to make sure that, if we are going to withdraw any kind of care here, is that they're here. A lot of
Yeah.
them do come in here. We want to, because this is somebody that they've had forever. They love them, they care about them. And, it is a process that we want to make sure that we give the time that it takes for any individual that needs to come in from the group home to be there with the participant, whether it's a procedure or end of life. And
Yeah.
honestly, it's just such an honor to work with some of the nurses in the group homes and all the staff that go in hand. So it definitely needs to be part of this process. And they usually always are.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a very emotional process for a lot of people. And I know from being on the hearings, I've seen it firsthand myself, with administering hearings, just how connected a lot of the staff are and how much they truly care for the person. And like you said, I think you hit it right on the nail, like family, of having that relationship and knowing the person so well. And that's why for SDMC, we really try to also make sure that all the important people for the person is included. Even when we have correspondents who legally can't make the decision for the person, but they're an advocate and have been involved all along, we want this person to be involved so that they can speak to the panel and really help them understand, why they do, feel that this request is in their best interest, or maybe help us understand why they feel like it's not. It's really that perspective that's helpful. So thank you. I want to turn our attention to talk a little bit about preparing your team or even yourself for an SDMC hearing. A lot of the times when we're doing training, we're really trying to help providers really understand what to expect from an SDMC hearing. Because if you haven't been involved in one, it can seem intimidating at times. You know, we've all started at a beginner at some point, and we have to build our skills and our confidence and comfortability. So I want to talk a little bit about what are some strategies that you've learned along the way just to make sure that you're prepared to provide testimony at the hearing for the request or to get your team together? How do you determine who's necessary to be there? And Anoop, you can even talk from the legal side of things of determining what type of questions you need to ask so that you can make sure that you know your questions are answered. Sophia?
So we have it a little bit easier in some ways, I think, because, you know, it's a set group of individuals who've typically lived in the same house or had the same team. But yes, the first time you go through SCMC, it's very intimidating. You know, everybody that hears court hearing and, you know, raise your right hand gets a little nervous. But the first thing we say is obviously most of the staff that attend the hearing, and I'll speak a little bit about that in a minute, they know the individual best, and just to speak truthfully. And if they don't know something, it's better to say, I'm not sure, and go back to it. But also in terms of, we typically do the trainings with them and we'll do a mock session, right? Because we know the typical questions that are asked by the panel, to determine those three questions of capacity, family visiting, how often does the family visit? Has there been anybody that visits? And then lastly, in terms of the medical piece, you know, if it's a procedure that's occurred before, they'll probably ask, how did the last procedure go? How did the individual respond to anesthesia? And so on. So we try to prepare each department in terms of the questions that may be asked. So nursing, go back to the record, because that nurse may have not been here 8 years ago when the person had the last colonoscopy. So if they can find any information about how that last one went. And then same with the residential team, right? They're the ones that are there at the house every day. They know who may or may not come to visit. From social services side, we of course know if the individual doesn't have family, but there may be a time that, you know, a great aunt from South Carolina came up and visited, and we should know that as well. So we try to prepare our team as best as possible, so that they're not surprised with what they're going into and they feel a little bit more prepared at the hearing.
I really like your idea of kind of doing really a mock session just to help prepare them. I mean, with anything that if we practice, we become more comfortable. So I really appreciate you sharing that. Is there someone who would like to talk a little bit more about that? Stacy?
Yes. So I often reach out to the team and ask that whoever brings the individual to the hearing is a familiar staff. We often have staff that go into the homes and they haven't, you know, they're like, can you bring them to this hearing? And they have never worked with them before. So I always ask for familiar staff, somebody that's worked with them for a long time and knows about their routine, decisions that they make in the home and whatnot. I often do a lot of studying into their medical chart just to check to see if they've had the procedure before or if they've had anesthesia before. Just doing this for 8 years, I know who's had issues come up with anesthesia or whatever. So I usually can testify to that myself without even having the nurse have to say anything. But also, I check their life plan prior, just to make sure that there's no family. I actually was on vacation one time and they had to do a hearing without me there. And I got a call while I was in the airport saying that they ended the hearing because a staff member testified that they had reached out to the father of the individual who had nothing to do with the person his whole entire life, but they were starting to FaceTime him and get to know him. And nobody knew about this except for the staff in the home who was just trying to do a good thing for the person that we support. And the good thing that came out of it is that the father is actively involved now and does make decisions for the individual. So, sometimes we find those kind of things. You look in the life plan and you're like, well, they have a sister. Why aren't they deciding for him? And we reach out to the sister and they're like, yeah, we'll absolutely, would love to make decisions for that person. So those kind of good things come out of it. And I think that's, one of the awesome things about doing this.
Thank you for sharing that experience too, because yes, that can happen at a hearing, right? Well, where maybe we do find that maybe there's someone who could make a decision. And again, we're always looking at, are they legally authorized, right? Are they available? Are they willing? And if they are and they're authorized, then they are the preferred decision maker. So that is one of the things about SDMC is, one decision does not rule all decisions moving forward, even in terms of capacity and surrogacy. If a future surrogate or someone who is legally authorized does come up, then, SDMC isn't going to be the decision maker. And the same thing, if the person's capacity changes, maybe they can understand a less complex procedure, but not something more complicated. We always protect their rights in terms of being able to make their own decisions. Anoop, did you want to mention something before? I think I saw you were unmuted, so I want to give you a couple of minutes too.
Right. Just in terms of the questioning, obviously we have the panel has 3 questions they need to answer. So we want to explore some of that if we're unsure. So depending on the circumstances of the case. But we've had cases where, we think somebody is capacitated and we will ask questions about that to see, to what extent has the staff explored it with them, explained it to the individual, what were the responses. We will explore also with regard to family members. And then with regard to best interests, that's some of the research we're doing. We want to challenge the witness to say, well, what are the risks of this? What do we expect to accomplish from this treatment? And I think it's important, and I know the folks on this panel are preparing, their staff and their witnesses. But that's just such an important part of this process that I really want to stress from MHLS's perspective. Oftentimes we'll see a witness who really isn't able to answer those questions. They're going on the doctor's recommendation and they can't really explain why this is what's being recommended. So I would really urge, folks that are bringing these applications to have somebody there who has studied the chart, really are familiar with why they think this is in the individual's best interest, because you will be asked questions about that. That's important, even because things aren't always so clear whether it is in their best interest. There are risks involved in every procedure, and so there needs to be knowledgeable folks able to answer questions at the hearing.
Yes, thank you. That is very important because our panel members are very thorough too, and they will ask questions. And sometimes, if they feel like you don't have enough evidence, maybe they'll try to contact the physician at the hearing, or they could request more information. So, making sure that you're prepared, ready to make your case is what I say. You're bringing a request forward to SDMC, and you have to be prepared to really provide enough evidence to really rule out that the person does not have capacity, they do not have a surrogate, and that the medical request is truly in their best interest. So preparation is key. Vicki?
Yeah, one of the things that we do for our social work department as a whole is we really do enough training and talking. So when we have a new social worker starting, we talk about the SDMC, we talk about OPWDD, we talk about the different laws that govern that specific patient. So it's really an important thing, and we always have each other to talk about different things about, especially when it comes to these SDMCs. But the other thing that we do, we have a palliative care department, which we have attending doctors who are part of that. Is when we talk about whether it's end of life or what it may be, is that they are really well aware of this particular process as well. And part of what we do is try to explain to the teams and doctors that we're here with, whether it's for a medical procedure or end of life, is really to let them know that. But when we are in these committees and we are having these hearings, it's really like the family. Families are going to ask all the same questions. What is in the best interest? Is this the best, interest? Is what's the risk? So when we're talking to them, it's really explaining to them that we really want them to understand what is going on with this patient, and if this is really in generally the best interest. They get to make that decision because they are acting as if the family can say, I don't want this to happen for whatever reason. So it's really just having that open communication and conversation and addressing any of their concerns or questions they may have regarding the hearing in itself.
No, and I think that's a great point. It's just like if you're explaining it to an individual, a doctor explaining it to someone, you need this care. We really need to know why it's necessary, what your medical history is, what your diagnosis is, right? To move forward and be able to make an informed decision. And the panel is in a position of making decisions based on, legal determinations, right? For capacity, they're looking, and surrogacy, they're looking at clear and convincing evidence. And Noop can speak to this. And then for best interest, they're looking at a preponderance of the evidence. So they are held to specific standards in which they're making these decisions. So making sure that they have all of the information is really, really important. Um, I want to talk a little bit more about if you were providing guidance to new providers, like say you have new staff coming into your agencies, what are some of the advice that you give them? If you had to think back to when you were first starting this, and there was things that you wish you knew, right? Like some of the key kind of like tools. I wish I knew this. I wish somebody had said this to me coming into and being responsible for some of these individuals and really requesting consent through SDMC. What are some of those things that you wish you knew? Can you share a couple of things? And even from MHLS perspective, because we have new MHLS representatives that we frequently work with too, and that's something that we try to do, annually is just training to make sure that everybody is aware of what our services is, how the program works, because we've learned even as a program when people better know the services we're offering, then we can provide smoother hearings and make sure that consent, that the decisions are supportive of the individual's needs at the end of the day. We're all here to support the individual. So making sure that we're all on the same page is important. Anoop, did you want to go?
I just wanted to say, in terms of training, you're right. We do have a lot of new lawyers, and oftentimes we're sitting with them uh, um, during these hearings. And I have to say, we've actually used the Justice Center website and your mock video. It's been very helpful, right? Because you have all these resources up there. I really have to compliment you on that. There's a lot of good resources up there. You have a lot of good material. You have a lot of training material for volunteers, and it's so we actually utilize that, and we really go through the process. And again, as you were alluding to before, we talk about the different standard, and then sometimes from MHLS's perspective, there's some of those cases that we often think SDMC is an appropriate forum, but sometimes it may not be an appropriate forum for a particular case, and talking to our staff and talking that through. And what the differences are in terms of the standards. If you're in a Supreme Court, it's different than if you're at SDMC, and breaking that down for the lawyers to understand.
Thank you. And I know that sometimes we do get complicated requests, and even our legal counsel in house is working with MHLS just to figure out, is this the best place for the person to get care for? Do they qualify, or do we need to be looking at another option here? So thank you for pointing that out. Sophia, I think you were unmuting before. Would you like me to go to you?
Sure. Yeah, I think that there's a few things that if I were to do this from scratch again, it would be really, again, to use the website for guidance. You guys have a lot of good information on that. But also ensuring that, if possible, the doctor uses the PDF version of the form. Because what we find a lot of times is we literally, even with the nurse on SDMC, it takes us some time to even figure out what the procedure is that they're recommending. And of course, sometimes our staff know the general component of it, biopsy, but they might not know the details of, this or that. So really trying to ensure that everybody uses the PDF version, so that we don't have to decipher physicians writing. And then also what we do here, again, like I said, we do the mock sessions. And any of our staff that are new to SDMC, we have them as the alternate, and they attend hearings on the cases so that they kind of get familiar on a backwards level. So they go to the hearing, one of the first
Okay.
hearings first, and then we back into the paperwork, because sometimes just handing paperwork to a new staff that has no idea what SDMC is can be overwhelming. So we found that listing them as the alternate and kind of giving them an overview first has been helpful. And then they'll slowly start filling out the paperwork with me at first. And then eventually they'll be able to do it by themselves.
Are there any times when, you're getting a request and maybe it's complicated and you or your medical staff need to contact the doctor for clarity just to make sure that you do have adequate information to offer at the hearing? Because most of the times for a major medical procedure, it is, a registered nurse or a medical professional at the program who is offering testimony. But then when we get end of life related, we usually have a licensed physician. So the testimony and the people testifying are different. So just wondering if there are ever times that you come across a procedure and you're like, I'm not fully aware of how this procedure is completed, and maybe I need a more information. I need to prepare at a deeper level here.
Yeah, so our director of nursing is always in communication with the physician that's
Okay.
requesting the procedure to be done. I'm a psychologist by trade, so I don't know many medical things. So, at that point, I do kind of hand the baton to our director of nursing and our nursing staff to handle that piece. And we work in conjunction to make sure that everybody's ready for the hearing. And again, I'm not going to speak to medical things that I don't understand. But yeah, they'll be in communication with the doctor and ask any clarifying questions before we even submit the packet to SDMC.
Stacy, do you ever have a similar experience? Because I know that you submit several cases to us. So,
Google is our friend.
okay.
So just, I think that we can get a lot more answers quicker, like just researching certain procedures, doing it that way, because sometimes getting a hold of the doctor can be difficult. I don't think I've ever ran into a situation where it was something that we didn't really understand. But to go back a little bit about something that I would want to show somebody coming in new, is that more often than not, I have nurses asking me, why are we doing another capacity? We just like a year ago did a capacity, and we know that this person's capacity hasn't changed. And I've learned over time that we need to put the person first. And we're trying to make them as independent as possible. And just because they cannot consent for a colonoscopy or a major surgery doesn't mean that they can't consent for a tooth extraction under sedation. So I try to teach the new nurses that and just explain to them that we want to do the best we can to let them make decisions on their own if they can.
That is a great point, person-centered, and we want to foster independence so that people can be involved in their own care. Are there ever different strategies that you need to implement to figure out if a person can provide consent, if they understand, they can comprehend? Have any of you ever had experience with that? Like maybe having to use communication devices or picture boards? Could you speak a little bit to that? Because I know at SDMC, we sometimes will ask, well, how have you assessed capacity? Or if we see the capacity evaluation, we might have some questions on how the person, we're always looking at what is their typical communication style, right? How do they communicate what they want, what they need, what type of decisions do they make? And sometimes people are using communication devices or different styles. Vicky, it looked like you had some things to offer on that.
Yeah, there's when you asked that question, there was a specific case that kind of came to mind because one of the good things in our hospital, being in a hospital, we have various doctors. We have psychiatrists that do capacity determination. We have medical providers that can do it. But sometimes it is questionable whether or not the individual has a capacity based on sometimes their disability. In one particular case, we weren't 100% sure because the patient was talking to only one person, but not really talking to the rest of the group. But there was a question, this is somebody that has previously made decisions on their own, and we didn't want to take that away. And we were able to connect with their psychologist in the community and do a video call with them present there, with our team present in the room, and really it was determined at that point this patient did have capacity to make a decision for that procedure and that we didn't have to go through SDMC. Eventually, the patient started to lose that capacity and we went on a different level where we did have to go. But it was really, again, this is a testament to the group home staff that really knew this patient and said, this is not something that she typically does, and it was out of character. And it was really nice to see him be part of that process and have the outpatient provider say, hey, this is somebody that does, and I will determine capacity right here. And we were able to do it. So it was really a nice thing to see all in all.
And that's a wonderful example for you to share because it is true that, sometimes if someone's in a different setting, it can be frightening, it can cause anxiety, and sometimes people will shut down or not communicate like they typically would. So having them be able to communicate with someone they're familiar with and trying different steps before we say, hey, this person isn't able to consent is important for some people who especially have had a prior history of self-consenting for their medical decisions. I want to bring us a little bit to talk about a little bit more about any of the challenges people have run into when, supporting an individual requiring consent through SDMC. Think about, we've talked a little bit about completing the declaration forms, but also think about, reviewing the case with SDMC and maybe having follow up after that, having to work with the clinicians after to gather supporting information if something's missing or something's unclear, all the way up to really participating in the hearing and making sure everybody can attend. Vicky, I think on your end, that might be a little bit more complex with getting all the doctors together and pulling that together and then making sure staff from the residents or groups homes can also be there. And then Anoop, even in terms of like representing the individual legally, any challenges that sometimes you might run up against of even communicating with some of the providers. We could just talk a little bit about that. And then on the other side of that, we'll talk about some of the benefits too. So,
For me, it's usually trying to really explain it to an attending who's hugely busy that I have to take an hour away to sit. But the good thing is that there's always residents, fellows that could come in for me. But I think the challenge is really explaining to the ultimately busy acute hospital setting provider to say, I need you for an hour. And trying to explain that this is just like as if you were sitting down with a family. Once you do, they're pretty good, but it's very busy. It's very fast paced here. So that's one of the challenges that we have. But ultimately, we're able to have a nice heart to heart and at least get somebody from the team to come sit with us. But that's usually my only biggest challenge outside of getting the capacity piece. Other than that, it's pretty smooth sailing. SDMC is usually very good to us about setting it up very quickly because of the setting we ask for expedited, and typically our turnaround is within a week time frame. So I have to say that honestly, it is a very smooth process. They do a very good job with getting panelists for the hearing, and it's really a smooth sailing once we get everything going, and it's a very fast turnaround. So we appreciate that very much here at Upstate.
thank you. It's really a group process. I say it all the time. It's not just one person, it's really everybody, from in terms of in the hospital, the residential facilities, all the way to SDMC, our volunteers and contractors. It's a collaboration approach to make sure the person gets the care they need. Um, it was the Anoop, were you the one that wanted to go next? Sorry.
No, that's fine. I didn't, I want, the one thing I have that I think is a little frustrating is sometimes the expedited hearings don't need to be expedited. I mean, they do by the time they're doing them, they need to be expedited. But they didn't need to be expedited in the first place. And so, look, we're all busy. And then it becomes, you really have a lot, you're crunching to kind of like learn what the procedure is, see the client, speak to folks. And it's one of those things it's best to get ahead of. And the SDMC staff are great in that they're letting us know ahead of time, trying to schedule it with us so I can speak to somebody at the residence and I can do as much legwork as I can ahead of time. And I'm trying to do that. But it can be a little frustrating, and you want to make sure you've really vetted everything and you're able to have a full, plenary discussion on everything that needs to be talked about at the hearing. And if it's rushed and it's expedited, unnecessary, and it didn't need to be that way, it can be frustrating.
I can understand that. And just to help people understand, it's the doctor, the ordering clinician who would say, does this request need to be expedited or not? Meaning it's urgent and we need to try to hold the proceeding within 10 days. So just to give our audience a little bit of an understanding of that. And sometimes we'll get a case and we'll ask the doctor, is it necessary to be expedited if there is more time? But it is really up to the clinician to determine that. But if MHLS does ask SDMC, we do try to look into it, be mindful, because we do understand that that status does make us have to move quicker. And we do try to really prioritize the care that needs to be prioritized, firsthand, rather than having all of our requests to be expedited. So it's something the SDMC nurse does keep in mind and review, and we do ask questions when we think it's necessary. Stacy, did you have anything to mention in this area? Any challenges that you've run up against?
I think one of my biggest challenges, and we've learned a little bit of it, what to do going forward, is just getting the staff and the individual to the hearing on time. I typically ask them to be there 20 minutes early, because, we all know that staffing is short right now and it's difficult sometimes, and communication from one shift to another, and sometimes they forget that somebody has a hearing. So a lot of communication, reminders the day prior, the reminders the morning of. We don't want to waste the panel's time, or we want to make sure that the procedure can be completed on a timely basis, so we don't want to have to put off the hearing. So we do a lot of communicating with the staff and the team to make sure that everybody's attending and they're on time, because we don't want to have to cancel that if they don't show up.
Yes, thank you. I think one of the things that some people do run into is technology issues. So trying to make sure you log in early, you've tested the connection. With WebEx, it is really important that you download the software. And in some of the agencies, that can be blocked by your IT.
Mhm.
So just making sure you've done that beforehand, so that when you're going to join the hearing, you're not running into that issue, because that adds more pressure. So you try to reduce some of
Mhm.
that pressure you're going to run up against too, just to help you feel better about the
Right.
process that's going to come. So
And that's one of the biggest reasons why we do have everybody come to the hearing in my office, or a location that we're all together. So there's only one computer trying to get on, and not, 4 or 5 computers trying to get on. And, typically, there's at least one that's not going to get on. So we do our best to make sure that we can do it all in one location.
that's great. And I think, Stacy, if I remember right, you guys have had audio issues before too. So you figured that out now. I think now you guys use the phone in the house because the computer was creating like a feedback issue. So really figuring out all these things, because
Mhm.
it can cause disruptions during the hearing. So
Yeah, absolutely. I do get on via video, and I use my phone for audio.
yeah.
It's a little confusing at times for the panel to see that there's somebody strange on there, but I just want to make sure that they can hear us, and that there's nothing that's going to stop us from, getting the hearing completed.
I've seen it too. You guys pass around the phone so then you guys can hear better too. So it does help. Yeah. Sophia, was there anything you'd like to mention about challenges?
Yeah, so sometimes the only challenge, it doesn't happen as often, but sometimes the provider wants to schedule the procedure before we even have started the process. And then that kind of puts a time crunch on us. So we try to have um, the appointment either not scheduled until we know, okay, at least we've gathered all the documents. But sometimes the scheduling can be tricky because again, certain facilities have longer wait lists. So we don't want the individual to wait longer, but then, it's a guessing game of, well, should we do it 2 weeks from now? Should we do it 3 months from now? Should we wait until we have the approval? But our team does a good job at trying to figure it out, especially with the doctor's offices that we're more familiar with, and their timeline. But that is something to consider as well.
Thank you. And now I want to talk about the opposite side of this. We were talking about the challenges. What are some of the benefits that you see to SDMC in terms of this service being available to individuals with special needs, and then also as a provider having access to this type of service for the people that you support? And whoever wants to go first, you can just unmute and I'll see it. Anoop?
I have something to say about it. I mean, I alluded to a little bit earlier about oftentimes, look, when you're doing an SDMC hearing and the rules of evidence aren't the same and the standard may not be the same as a Supreme Court hearing, oftentimes you can think, well, keeping it to a higher standard might be better from a rights perspective. But we've also find one of the benefits of the SDMC process, even although those things are different, you really have folks that are very knowledgeable about this population. And we've had situations where, you know, a client, we think they've been capacitated. And I have to say, in a few of these cases, I'm not sure we would have fared as well in front of a Supreme Court judge, because they wouldn't have had the familiarity with these individuals. And, you know, and look at the panel members you have. You have a variety of panel members from different walks of life. And you know, they bring something unique to the process. So, you know, I'm a very rights focused advocate. And sometimes I surprise myself when I say, well, you know, some of you know, the standards maybe, you know, one could argue lower, but you get something different and better in another way by having the panel members coming from the walks of life that they are and really understanding this population. So I think that's one of the benefits I've seen in this process. And, you know, and one of the things I'm going to just say in terms of going back again to the frustrations is we found that there have been a couple of cases where getting getting all the 4 panel members on has been difficult, and we've had to proceed with 3 panel members. And again, if you have an emergent case, you know, what do you can go forward, and we do go forward. But that's another thing that I think folks don't even, maybe there's not enough knowledge about, maybe even volunteering for these panels. But I know there are a lot of people who work in and around this field that would, I think, really love to volunteer on these panels and can offer a lot. I'm not sure what the outreach is about that, but I'd like to see maybe more. It seems to be the same panel members that we're, at least in the Bronx, that we're seeing.
No, thank you for bringing that up. And I think you hit on 2 points. Our volunteers are very passionate, they're dedicated, they're true advocates. They really push for the rights of the individual. And our volunteers do come from different aspects, they have different experiences. We have volunteers who have experience as a licensed medical professional, licensed attorney, family member, advocates. You know, those are what our positions are made of. When the legislator was creating the program, they really wanted to make sure that people who were making these decisions on behalf of individuals with special needs had special, you know, insight on the needs of individuals with special needs. So that is a great part of this. But I think, yes, it's definitely a partnership of spreading awareness of the volunteer opportunity that we have at SDMC. We have a lot of hearings a year, which means we need a lot of volunteers to help us fulfill this mission. And you spoke a little bit, Anoop, about, you know, how do we get people informed? How do we, you know, what is the process? We do outreach as the Justice Center a lot, you know, at our events, just explaining the volunteer opportunities that we have. But if people are interested, they can always contact our program to learn more about the volunteer opportunity, see what the eligibility requirements are, and also visit our website. If you visit the Justice Center website and look for SDMC, you'll learn more about that too. And our initial volunteer training is online and self-paced, so it does make it convenient. And our opportunity is flexible. So please, if anybody is interested, we definitely get a lot of our volunteers who are providers, who are family members. We're always searching for volunteers who can help us fulfill our mission at the Justice Center. So, was there anybody else who wanted to mention their, you know, experiences in terms of the benefits of SDMC and utilizing these services? Stacy?
I guess the one thing that comes to my mind is just the amount of people that it takes to put this together and how each one of them is advocating for the person. You know, down to the MHLS lawyer, to the nurse, to the SDMC panel members, and just determining that that person is not of capacity or of capacity, because I think it's important that that is, you know, what we're thinking about firsthand, because we want to give them the, you know, as much independence as possible. So that benefit is, I think, very crucial.
Thank you, Stacy. Sophia, did you want to say something?
Yeah, sure. So I think overall the process, has definitely helped streamline things. I know it's been in place for a little bit now. But it's nice as a provider agency to know that, okay, this is the steps you have to follow. It makes it very easy for us. And your team is always available if there's a procedure that we're not completely sure about. I always check with them even 10-ish years later, into this, and they're always responsive. And then also going to the hearing, of course, some individuals, everybody wishes they have a family member. So it's nice to have the individual feel and know that there are people that want to protect them and support them. And oftentimes, the individual leaves the hearing feeling great because you have 8 or 9 people in the room talking about them positively and asking them questions and including them in the process to the best of their ability. So it's always a nice thing to see the individual typically leaving the room, happy and knowing that there's people that care about them and support them.
That is really great to hear. That made my day personally. Vicky?
Yeah, and I think to kind of piggyback off that, I think, going back to like the first time that I actually sat through a hearing when it was in person and going through the process of, having people here and it being recorded, kind of just amazed at the level of care of, people have. And I think to kind of think about it is that it makes it feel so much nicer when people don't have family, they really do, but they don't realize it, and that no person's really alone. And I think it really is it's a process. It can be taxing in times, and being in the hospital, I'm sure being out in outpatient doing this, but at the end when you see it and how many what a group of people that actually care about these individuals that don't have somebody and are making the best decisions that are for that individual. It's remarkable to see and be part of. So I don't know. There's a huge benefit, and it's a really beautiful one. And I've been on objection ones and non-objection for both. So it's really nice to see how it actually plays out.
Well, I think there's a
Definitely
lot of
benefits. Yeah.
protections across the
Mhm.
board, just even in terms of, we're really vetting from the start. Does this person qualify? The time you're submitting something to SDMC, all the way up to the panel and even MHLS being in there to make sure that they're really reviewing everything and crossing their dots and T's. So
Absolutely. And our mental health, I'm sure that is you and Luke as well. It's really lovely and she comes up and sees us. We sit, she comes and meets the patient, and it's really just nice to see the whole process that, this isn't just a process. It is a goal-oriented task that is with passion and care for an individual, and to making sure that they have the empathy that they deserve and that they're taken care of just the way they should be. It's just really a nice process to go through.
So we're going to move to questions in a minute, but I just want to see, are there any last details anybody would like to share before we do that? Is there anything you'd like to share with the audience before we open it up for questions? Anything that we didn't cover that you would like to potentially mention? If there's not, we can definitely move to questions, but I just want to give the room to do that before we do. All right, so I think we're good to move to questions. Davin, if you can let us know some of the questions that have come in.
Sure, there's just a couple ones. One was, our religious beliefs considered in end of life decisions?
So that is something we're looking at for end of life decisions. And Vicky is here too if she ever wants to jump on with me. So we're really looking to ask, the providers at this point, if the person can't verbalize, if the individual has ever indicated any personal beliefs or preferences for their end of life care decisions. Again, if the person is nonverbal, we're really looking to the residents, any maybe correspondence that are involved in this person's life to tell us, have they ever, attended religious events? Have they ever said what they would want in their end of life? That's really how we look to gather that information. We're looking at what documentation can you help us so we can really include this in the process if the person has a preference.
That was perfect. You don't need my assistance with this, but yeah, same thing. But it's on our form for that reason as well. We just want to know, but it all goes into that personal preference. The panel is making this decision based on that person's personal preferences and best interests, not any other basis for it, not their own.
This is sort of SDMC adjacent, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Um, have you ever, has the panel ever determined that someone has the capacity to consent, but the physician, the treating physician, doesn't feel that they have the capacity? How does that get
I
resolved?
can take that one, probably, and
I
you
was,
some
yeah,
thoughts
that
on it
sounds
as
great,
well.
Vicky.
Yeah, often an SDMC proceeding starts with a physician who says, I don't feel comfortable taking this person's consent because I don't think they have capacity. That's why there's a capacity evaluation done, though. So there's a capacity evaluation done. If that evaluation, the person assessing it is a psychiatrist or psychologist, it says, no, they understood this, they can make their own decisions. SDMC is, we legally can't take a case if someone says, yes, they have capacity, and we would say, bring that evaluation to that doctor who said they wouldn't accept it. If it came to an SDMC proceeding and the panel, even though a psychiatrist had said this person does not have capacity, the panel decides, we've talked it through with them, it seemed like they really understand and we think they do have capacity and we've found that they have capacity. We're not going to go any further with it, and that would be a determination. There would again be a piece of paper that you could take to the physician, because we're always operating on the idea that someone can make their own medical decisions. So unless there's proof that they aren't unable to do that, and a panel agrees, we agree that they're unable to do that, we're not going to be changing. We're not going to be ignoring their wishes.
Great. And the last question is, are there any other special requirements that someone who wants to volunteer for SDMC should know about or have? Do they have to have an education level, any kind of special experience?
Great question. I mean, Vicky, I can cover that if that sounds
Yeah.
okay. So we talked a little bit about the roles that our volunteers are serving in. So there are specific eligibility criteria. So I'll go through the roles again. We're looking for people who are a licensed medical professional. This could be a doctor, a registered nurse, a psychologist. We're looking for people who are a licensed attorney within New York State, family members. So if you have a person in your life with a disability, you would qualify, a former person who's received services through SDMC, or an advocate who is advocating for, care needs for individuals with special needs and mental health disorders. So really, the biggest thing is to make sure that you qualify, you're interested in doing this service, and that you also have the time to. Time, is a big thing with us. We operate Monday through Friday. Typically, our hearings are anywhere between 8 to 3 o'clock. They can go from 45 minutes to an hour and a half to 2 hours. So just making sure you're available. But again, if you are interested, feel free to contact our program. I'm always willing to talk with somebody personally just to see if your experience, matches with our needs as a program. And you can also visit our website. There's actually a nice little video that says, how to become a volunteer, and it goes over those eligibility criteria again.
Great. That's the last question. So take it
Okay.
away, Stephanie.
All right. So I will just thank our panelists for attending today and for dedicating your time and your expertise. It has been a pleasure to speak with you and just provide some tips on, your experiences navigating the SDMC program. I hope that those in attendance today have walked away feeling like they learned something new about SDMC, and also realizing that, with anything, you start as a beginner. So if you have never utilized SDMC before and you may need to in the future, you can learn more about it, and we're here to support you. In the chat, information for additional training, resources, and then the declaration forms can be found. Contact SDMC if you're looking for additional training support too. I'll actually note that I think it was 2 years ago we did an overview on the SDMC program, and that video is actually on our website. So if you're looking for a more comprehensive overview of the services, who qualifies, and how our process works in more detail than today's discussion, please go and look there.